Eloise in Oxonia, a creative podcast by the Oxford Writers' House. Follow English student Eloise Weaver as she moves through the city of Oxford, encountering stories, past and present. Eloise's adventures are fantasy, but the authors, people and ideas she encounters are as real as you and I.
Listener, you caught me at an awkward time. I'm having an essay crisis. My final essay on the 20th century novel is due tonight. My mind has not been fully clear over the last few days, and I needed to get out of the city. This morning I took the earliest train I could and travelled as far as time allowed, to a little-known town on the periphery of Oxfordshire called Wallingford. I've booked one night at a hotel, just to focus. My tutor agreed to accept a late submission, which will be marked as soon as I'm back. Sometimes, the pieces of life don't fit together until you zoom out. You have to visit adjacent villages or winding country lanes leading to odd rabbit trails, sidelines and bypaths. When writing an essay, you can't get the whole paper out at once. It needs to steep in several atmospheres. Wallingford is an unremarkable little English town with a typical setup. A market square, train station, a few parish churches, a war memorial and a castle. Agatha Christie spent the later part of her life here, and is said to have described it in one of her novels. If the town could talk, she says it might say this: "Let this modern speeding world dash along their newfangled road. I was built to endure in a day when solidarity and beauty went hand in hand." She enjoyed attending local pantomimes and kept a low profile here.
So where does Wallingford appear in her novels is actually a really fun one. So Wallingford appears as itself once, as far as I can tell, in the novel Cards on the Table, as the home of Miss Anne Meredith, who's one of the characters in Cards on the Table, and I'll leave that there because, of course, no spoilers, as always. But Wallingford appears as itself there. But additionally, Christie scholar John Curran, who curated her notebooks and published them, posits that Wallingford was the model for the fictional town of Market Basing, at least as it appears in the Hercule Poirot novel Dumb Witness. And so he talks about that in his Secret Notebooks curated collection. But Market Basing, if Wallingford is Market Basing, as he posits, then Market Basing itself is actually a super interesting space in the Christieverse because it's fictional. So you've got the fictional town of Market Basing, which is based on Wallingford, at least according to Curran. But Market Basing appears in the universes of Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple and Tommy and Tuppence and Superintendent Battle. And those are characters that don't typically, with the exception of Poirot and Battle, those are characters that don't typically intersect. So for example, in the Christieverse, Poirot and Marple never intersect. So even if maybe the characters are both would have happened to be in London at the same time, they don't ever interact. But we can imagine this fictional Market Basing as being one of the few places that Poirot, Marple, Battle, and Tommy and Tuppence, theoretically anyway, could have actually intersected. Right. Well, I mean, you know, Agatha Christie didn't have the easiest life, but she always bounced back. She was super resilient. Even things went horribly wrong, and things did go horribly wrong, right? Her treasured mother passed and her first husband left her, and she was left as a single mom and a working writer, right? So what she said was, a writer is someone who writes. Writing is work like any other work. So you figure out what needs to be done next and you do it. You know, I think there are probably some works that she wrote at times when she was struggling a little bit more with her personal life that are things that she certainly identified as being not her favorites, although all of them has a special place in my heart as part of the overall Christie oeuvre. But still, basically, you figure out what the next thing you need to do and you just do it. She was born in Torquay in 1890. She had a sister and a brother, and of course parents, but she also had, because of a complicated family situation, she also had an auntie granny. While she was homeschooled, a lot of times people say, oh, well, she was homeschooled. She was homeschooled, but she was educated formally in different ways throughout that period of homeschooling. She married Archie Christie, and it was while she was married to Archie Christie, of course, that she got her start as a writer and published some of her famous early works. So she then had that name for her writing life for the rest. But she had one daughter, Rosalind, and Rosalind had a son, Matthew Pritchard. And Matthew Pritchard has a son, James Pritchard, and that's Agatha Christie's great-grandson. And Matthew and James are sort of Agatha Christie Limited, basically, now, and they preserve her legacy and intellectual property, and they're wonderful, absolutely wonderful, and really, really appreciate the amazing human being that their grandmother and great-grandmother was. So Archie left her. She had this daughter Rosalind, and then she met Max Mallowan, who was an archaeologist, and they got married, and then she stayed married to him. She wrote throughout, like I said, I mean, she wrote from 1920 to 1974, basically. She died in 76. And there you go. And like I said, other than that, right, she traveled, she did all this stuff. She basically lived in the UK her whole life, although she spent some extended periods away. So when Rosalind was a baby, she did a grand tour associated with the British Exposition at that time. The Detection Club still exists. Last I checked, anyway. The lovely writer Martin Edwards, who is a wonderful writer and a lovely man, has been president of it since 2015. It was founded around 1930. I mean, people say definitively it was founded in 1930, but you can imagine, I mean, the writers would have been talking amongst themselves at that point. So it's been around since 1930, but last I checked, it's still there. It originally was meant, obviously, as a place for detective novelists to talk to each other about their craft. And it originally excluded all but the most pure detective novels. So originally it didn't include thrillers or psychological dramas or any, and it's become a little bit more expansive over the past several decades. And the writers all agreed among themselves to play fair with readers. And so within the Detection Club, this fair play was codified by a guy named Ronald Knox, making his Decalogue, or his 10 Commandments, that offered the rules for detective fiction, the rules for playing fair with the reader. And these are things that we think of like no hitherto undiscovered poisons, no random twins appearing in the middle of the story as a way of providing an alibi unless you signaled it very well from the beginning. No murderer showing up at the last minute. The murderer can't be a character that nobody has met, through 95% of the book and kind of thing. But Christie, so she was really assiduous about playing fair with her readers. If you go back and you read anything that she ever said about writing, she was very, very committed to playing fair with her readers. But what I would say, my assessment is she really seems to have enjoyed having those rules as boundaries to push up against as hard as humanly possible. Like how close can I get? Or even to break while showing that she could still play fair with the reader. In other words, to say that even the rules themselves weren't perfect, that you could still play fair with the reader, that you didn't have to exactly precisely to the letter follow all the rules. So she was always innovating. She loved the challenge of innovating a new plot, a new technique, and confounding the reader while still scrupulously playing fair. So the Detection Club kind of offered the milieu in which a lot of that innovation happened. I mean, she really does it all the time, right? If you get to the end and you say, was that really? Yeah, you go back and you check. It really was. And in fact, it's very funny when you reread Agatha Christie, what you often discover is that she generally gave a really, really blatant giveaway clue within the first 15 pages or so. And if you, as a reader, were able to interpret it in the light in which you theoretically should have, you would have known all along. And yet you don't. And even half the time upon rereading, you still miss it. But honestly, going back and seeing that character was there. That item was described. I did know that thing was on the desk in the pocket, but it was so cleverly placed. And the writing is so smart that you didn't see it, but it was always there. In some ways, right? Agatha Christie could have just been one of a stream of crime fiction writers. She didn't write the first detective story. She didn't write the first detective novel. She wasn't the first woman who wrote a detective novel. Right. But what makes her important is the fact that she was who she was, and she was as brilliant as she was. And that kind of comes out in three ways that I like to think about it. So one of which is that in terms of innovations in the genre of crime fiction, many things that we now think of as being tropes or tricks or normal techniques that obviously everybody does are things that Christie either did it first, she did it best, or often both. Not only did she do it first, but the thing that she did was so basically perfect that it has become the canonical example. It's sort of the Platonic form of the innovation, and then everything that came after it is the thing that came after it. She remains the world's best-selling fiction writer. So 2 billion copies and counting. That was billion with a B for several reasons. So first of all, her output was extraordinary, with her written publications spanning from 1920 to 1976. That's a long writing career, and in fact was posthumous. It was also followed by a couple of short story recollections, but there were 66 crime novels, 6 other novels, 2 memoirs, 19 or so plays, including the world's longest running play, The Mousetrap, which is still on in London's West End. And her work has been adapted into every possible medium. It's been translated into 100 languages. It's been adapted into every possible medium, including video games. But it started being adapted for radio and film almost immediately in the 1920s. But it's been adapted for radio, film, television, streaming, like I said, podcasting, video games, board games, puzzles, you name it. There's an Agatha Christie adaptation. And all of that is to say, well, why? Like, what is it about what she wrote that means that all of these things are true? And it's because her work is infinitely readable, right? So you can pick up a copy in an airport and read it while you're very distracted and things are going on and you're tired and stressed and you're in the middle of traveling, and yet it's easy to read. And that doesn't mean it's simple. That doesn't mean it's simplistic. And that definitely doesn't mean it was easy to write. But what it means is it's incredibly readable. You engage with the characters, you engage with the plot. They're rereadable. Even if you know what happened, it doesn't matter. They're just interesting and they're fun and they're compelling and they hang together and they're just gorgeous. Or you, like me, you can be somebody who has read an individual novel maybe for the 30th time, right? And you're academically taking it apart. I use theories of information behavior to assess golden age crime fiction. That's the work that I do as an information scientist. And there's so much there. But regardless of what intellectual or academic lens that you take on her work, there's so much there. So you can read them along the gamut from purely entertaining all the way to deeply intellectually analyzing, and they're just spectacular. And they're the gift that keeps giving. They're amazing. And she was amazing. She was very physically vigorous, and she had an extreme zest for life. So I think a lot of times people imagine her as kind of a timid old lady with a typewriter, even when she was young. Like all of us, she was not always old. And she surfed. She surfed in South Africa. She surfed in Hawaii. She loved it. She went for long walks. She loved a good steak. She loved to travel. And I mean, not just fancy travel, but just getting out there and getting into places. And Max was an archaeologist. She accompanied him on a lot of his travels. She just loved to get out there and get into places and really dig into people and places and things. She embraced the physical as well as the intellectual world in all of its complexity, and she just loved every bit of it with just relish and zest. And it comes out especially if you read her autobiography, and it's really beautiful. And it's important to me that people know that, because like I said, I think they imagine her kind of type. But no, she was a real person. Because toward the end of her autobiography, there's this gorgeous passage where she talks about sort of preparing for her own death. I'm not kidding. And it's beautifully written. And she talks about the things that, even with this incredible zest for life that she still has as she's aging, the things that she misses, right? And, going bathing in a rough sea, or going for a very long walk, or being able to bite into a good steak, or the things that, and you really, like, you can physically feel the way she describes those things, and just how important living was to her. It's so beautiful. One of the reasons that we study crime fiction is because humans have been using crime fiction for literally millennia to help us process really big issues of what it means to be human. So love and hate and justice, and how to reckon with people who don't uphold the basic human contract. So the story of Cain and Abel is a murder mystery. We have several murder mysteries that emerge in Greek tragedy, but it's consistently the case that people use crime fiction to help them grapple with what's going on in the world. And I think because Agatha Christie is so widely read with so many copies and so many translations, I think you could also argue that she just herself has had an extraordinary impact on the whole world and how we imagine concepts of love, hate, justice, crime. It's really extraordinary to think of one person having that effect purely through writing what is largely entertaining detective fiction. But she did it.
It's hard to believe that Christie, the world's best-selling fiction writer of all time, crafted her plots here. With twists, clues, puzzles, and murderous perplexities, her novels have been outsold only by the Bible and Shakespeare. I imagine her reading the pathways of Wallingford for symbols and signals, taking her inspiration from the town people and ordinary daily events she witnessed. She might have seen a shifty-eyed baker impatiently arguing the price of bread with a customer, or an aristocratic lady having a clandestine affair with the vicar's son, and integrated these simple ideas into her mystery plots. Wallingford sits at the edge of the River Thames, its waters sparkling in the early morning light. Narrow, cobbled streets wind through the clusters of honey-coloured stone buildings. I walk through the town to my small hotel. The sun plays games with the town's streets, ducking in and out of heavy cloud cover. To the west, the ruins of Wallingford Castle rise against the horizon, a reminder of the town's strategic importance in medieval times. The castle's stone walls, weathered by centuries, now stand in peaceful solitude, surrounded by lush greenery and wildflowers that sway gently in the breeze.
Dew, almost frost. It's the heel-tap of summer, October's pourriture, and drunken bumblebees are plunged head down in buddleia nectar, stuck to the narrow goblets, trembling or sometimes tumbled to the yellow of aftermath, helpless, signalling prayers with a hooky leg. What should we do about the mess? Supposing you were to pick this last buttonhole of blousy Albertine, it would shed its ruffles. Reds of the season are liverish, apricots blotchy, pinks insipid, and no rhythm among the greens. Sun looks bloodless, serving at the final banquet. Remember ancient waiters at the Deux Magots? A few small flies, still real, among the diagonals of light, where leaves leak like inverted plops of air from gold-mouthed fishes. And there isn't a bird, not one, whose voice is not derelict. So light a lucky match among the trash, and watch how sap still forces bubbles out of a chopped branch.
I can feel summer coming and want to put all my effort into this final essay. What would Christie think about the strange string of events leading me here, to her town, at the end of my first year? She would look at the clues leading to this moment, tiny irregularities and out-of-place minutiae. Out of the blue, it occurs to me. I received a 5 on my prize essay, not a normal score. How did I miss that? 5 is the highest scoring card in a game. Which game? 9 card Don! Goosebumps form on my arms. Then, in a rush, there are more clues. A 9 of spades, the random comment made at the college garden party, worth 9 points. King, the name of the winning boat at the race Iris and I attended, 3 points. The Queen of Hearts, the MCR invitation, worth 2 points. And then Jax himself. A Jack in costume, an invitation to dance, accident or not. 1 point. So the only card missing from my hand by that logic would be an ace. These hints cannot be a coincidence. Can they? But what do they mean, and who might be behind them? A tutor? Professor Mead? Maybe Jax and his friends playing a prank. I mull over this new insight and enter my tiny, musky hotel room. Under my feet, the worn carpet is blighted with small holes, cigarette burns from decades ago, and soft stains resisting someone's vigorous attempt to rub them out. A small window overlooks a narrow, bramble-covered back garden, and there is a plastic kettle for tea, which is all that matters. I pour myself a cup. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction, Virginia Woolf once said. I get to work on the essay, pulling every last thread of mental energy I have left, tying up the paragraphs and tidying the sentences. Without the distractions of college, the essay comes relatively quickly. I don't even pause for food, but snack continuously on walnuts and orange juice. Finally, slightly dizzy and sitting in near darkness, the piece is done. Perfect? No. Finished? Yes. It's 10 o'clock at night. I edit for a while, email the essay to my tutor just before midnight, and collapse into a deep sleep. The next morning, feeling accomplished, I step back onto the train at Wallingford station with cool morning air brushing against my face. I find a quiet cabin with a window seat. The train hums to life, pulling away gently from this sleepy little town. A village refuge in the middle of nowhere, but for me, the key to unlocking a pattern. The train seems to repeat. 5, spade, king, queen, jack, ace. 5, spade, king, queen, jack, ace. If I close my eyes, I can see the tricks played strategically on a felt table in front of me. As we glide through the countryside, gentle scenery unfolds in front of me. Fields and scattered cottages, the Thames winding lazily along. The quiet rhythm of the train is soothing, and I watch the world pass in a blur, lost in thoughts of the day ahead. Iris calls me, and we sketch some plans for the weekend. The year is coming to an end. Soon she will be in France, and I will be back at the coast, skipping rocks and hopefully reading for pleasure again. I feel a pang of nostalgia knowing this time apart may change us, or even push our paths apart forever. Before long, we're pulling into Oxford station. The city is waking up. People rushing to shifts and research sessions. Cyclists weaving absent-mindedly in and out of the crowds. Familiar spires and stone buildings in the distance. Another morning, another set of tasks to complete and accomplishments to measure. I nearly run to college. The arches of the heavy door welcome me back. I feel a mixture of excitement and nerves as I pass through. In place of my old trepidation is a new sense of belonging. I quickly make my way to my pitch to see if my tutor managed to mark the essay in the early hours. Instead of a large document or envelope, there is only a single missive in my pitch. My hands are shaking from the rush of travel, but also from some strange foreknowledge that this moment will change everything. It's an invitation card. Mayday, 6 p.m, the Ace of Clubs, Cowley Road. I flip the card over. An Ace of Clubs! It's the final suit for 9-card Don! I love it when a mystery comes together.
Episode 11 of Eloise in Oxonia was produced by Sid Walter and written by Dr. April Power. The episode features original readings by Esme Rhodes, Judith Bunting and Kian Power. M.R. Peacock reads her own original poetry. Our interviewed expert is Dr. Michelle M. Kasma, who discusses the legacy of Agatha Christie. Special thanks go to the Poetry Archive for their expert support.